Welcome to the place where we learn about improv, 'cause public speaking can take you so far. Improv-ing speaking, say yes and flex your creative thinking. Improv-ing speaking, say yes and flex your creative thinking.
Welcome, everyone, to the Improv-ing Speaking podcast. So excited that you're joining us today. For our returning listeners, thanks again for coming back, checking out another episode. Excited to have you back. And for our new listeners, thanks for joining. You've picked a fantastic episode to join us for. I have an amazing guest on. Can't wait to hear all about her experiences and knowledge. It's going to be so fun. So you've picked a good one. And for everyone on this podcast, I like to talk to people with a background in improv, public speaking, performance, communication, creativity, and everything in between. And today's guest, well, she does it all. She might not consider it to be improv or improvisation focused, but I think she does a little bit of improv and encourages people to do improv just in different terms. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And she's an amazing public speaker. So let's get into it. Let's dive in. Let me tell you about our amazing guest today, Dr. Raquel Garzon. Dr. Garzon is the president and founder of Revitalize Project and author of the book, The Business of You, Leveraging Business Principles to Thrive in Life. I have her book. It's amazing. Raquel earned her Doctor of Health Science degree with a concentration in global health from Nova Southeastern University. In her doctoral studies, she focused her efforts in neuroscience and its impact on behaviors and behavior change. Raquel also holds a behavior science degree in nutrition from the University of Florida and a Master of Science degree in nutrition from Texas A&M University. She is a certified ASQ Six Sigma Green Belt, registered dietitian, certified personal trainer, a QPR suicide prevention gatekeeper trainer, and a certified mental health integrative medicine provider. She really does it all. Dr. Garzon speaks regularly at national and international conferences for wellness, mental health, talent development, and human resources professionals. She has presented to executive audiences from 40 of the top Fortune 100 companies, as well as to 12 CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. Raquel lives in southern New Mexico with her two children. She is half Cuban, half Uruguayan, speaks Spanish fluently, and enjoys traveling with her family. She enjoys salsa dancing, hiking, kickboxing, mountain biking, and anime cosplay. Amazing. Please welcome the one, the only, the super talented, super educational, buckle up, get ready. We're about to learn a whole lot. Dr. Raquel Garzon.
Thank you,
Yay,
Dana. It's so nice to be here with you.
What a resume. Oh my gosh.
How do I live up to that? I don't know if I can live up to that.
You will and more. Oh my God. You like, I used to be a certified personal trainer. I've let it lapse. I went to school to be a trainer, and then I started doing it in the gym, and I was like, this isn't quite what I thought it would be. But I love that you're a trainer, a dietitian, mental health, medicine provider, integrative medicine provider. I mean, you really are covering like the holistic person here and not just like one part of a person.
Thanks. Yes, that was really important to me. You know, when I got my training as a dietitian, it was super focused on just nutrition. And I learned very quickly that nutrition was such a small aspect of people, who they are, their behaviors, what they want out of life, that I just became a lifelong learner about humans, like human behavior, human performance, what makes us tick. And so this is what's taken me on this journey to get all these certifications. And I do keep up with the certified personal trainer because I wouldn't pass the exam if I had to take it again. I think I don't use it in the traditional sense of going into a gym. I use it more for understanding how all of these things connect together. And through that process, I got the certification. And so I'm able to leverage what I learned, but I don't actually go into the gym and train people. And when I go to the gym and work out, I just want people to tell me what to do, even though I have all of this knowledge, because I just don't want to think that much.
I hear you. You know what? There are lots of times right now, especially when I'm stressed. I put on the Peloton app and I put on like a 20 to 30-minute workout video. And then it kind of feels like I'm doing it with somebody, like somebody's there, they're telling me what to do. You absolutely need that. And I have the knowledge too. I mean, I've let it lapse, but yeah, I have the knowledge too. And sometimes you just need someone to tell you how to move and you'll do it.
Exactly.
And so what made you want to, with all these certifications, then you started to study neuroscience, and that's what you did your doctorate on, right?
Yes, I went back to school at age 40 to begin my doctoral degree, it was interesting because I graduated with my bachelor's and master's really before the internet was a thing. And so I had gone to school and done all of this research at a time that you just couldn't go search things on the internet and find them and get all of your resources. You'd literally have to go to the library and pull articles and then have photocopies made. And so when I started my doctorate, a lot of the work is online and there's all of this stuff that you post digitally. And I spent like the first month crying because I didn't like forget the content of what I was studying. I didn't even know how to study. And it was really funny because I went to my local library, believe it or not, don't laugh at me. And I went in and it was this, older lady who's already retired. She's volunteering at the library. And I asked her how I figure out how to search these articles. And she just looks at me and she says, honey, you can do this from home on your computer, right? I just felt so silly that this retired person who clearly was not in the age of computers either was feeling sorry for this, me, this, I don't know, old person that didn't know how to study. So it was definitely, it pushed me in a lot of different ways, but I did go back to do my doctorate because I just felt like I had more to learn about human behavior. And in the health world, it's just really interesting because we a lot of times know what we need to do, or we're even given the resources to make those things happen. And yet we still don't implement those things, even when they're good for us, even when not doing it is bad for us. And I was fascinated by that. And I just thought, okay, what makes us tick? How does this work? And so when I got into the program and, once I figured out how to do things digitally and all of that, I really focused in on that. What happens in other countries when there's malaria and they have access to malaria nets and yet they choose not to use them and then they get malaria, which has all of these devastating consequences. What is it about that? Or just a lot of really interesting examples. And the neuroscience behind it is the most fascinating. And it's applicable to really anything, not just health. It's applicable to making any kind of change or understanding how humans behave and why they do the things they do. So that's what launched my this company that I own, and I opened it in 2014. So I was I think 2 years into the doctorate, I was like, this is what I need to do. So it was really great from that perspective that I left a full-time position to start the company based on what I was learning.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh, you're just a wealth of knowledge. And for our listeners, Raquel and I met at the Art and Science of Health Promotion Conference in San Diego this past April. And I attended her session titled Unlocking Sustainable Behavior Change Through Neuroscience. And I have to say, it was my favorite session of the whole conference. And I'm not just saying that, it really was my favorite session. You were the best speaker. You're the most engaging, the most authentic, most vulnerable too. Some people were getting up and just trying to stay true to their slides. You had a ton of slides that were so informative. I don't even know if we got to all of them. And I didn't even care because you were just so engaging. I wanted to sit for another hour and listen to you. It was such a great, I still remember it. It was so great.
Oh, thank you. Because sometimes you just don't know. You're standing in this room and you're talking and it's dark and you don't know how people are responding. And I do veer from my slides. I create, a backdrop of what I want to do, but then my brain takes over and it goes into other lands. And then I inevitably don't cover everything that I thought I was going to cover. It's like I have these expectations and then I'm like, why do I do this? And so I appreciate the feedback and I loved your improv session. So one of the things that I did was to I try to challenge myself with things that I'm uncomfortable doing or things that I think I'm not going to be good at. So like, for example, if I were to go to the gym, I would go do a spinning class because I really don't like spinning. And because it's just good for your brain to do those sorts of things or to do something that you intuitively feel like, I'm just not going to be good at that. And so the improv session was one of those sessions that I just said, this really stresses me out. And not just like stresses me out when I'm doing it. I think I told you that I literally get stressed watching other people do improv. So I have friends that do improv and they invite me all the time. And I sit there like my butt cheeks are clenched. Every muscle is tense. Even watching something that's televised, like whose line is it anyway? I'm in a panic mode for the people. Like, I hope they don't mess up. I hope they can think of something on the spot. Oh my goodness. I'm so stressed for them. So then imagine me doing that. And so I challenged myself and I said, I'm going to go and I'm just going to keep an open mind. And, you just made it so accessible and so great. And I think it just has such a huge role for people like me who do public speaking can still benefit from something like that. And I think everyone could benefit in some way, shape, or form.
Thank you for sharing about that. Yes, I offered a guided improvisation for laughter, fun, and creativity activity session at the conference. And it was at the end of the day, it was like 5:30 to 6:30. So I was a little nervous at like, who's going to come at the end of the day after a long day of sessions and fun. And to be honest, this was one of the first in-person conferences back. This was my first in-person conference in a long time. And I'll be transparent. This was my first in-person session, offering the improv session in person. I did it a lot online, but to offer it in person, it was such a gift. It was so special. So having you a part of that first session, I think we smiled and laughed at least 75% of the time and mostly laughing. Like we were just laughing with each other. It was just, that will always have a special place in my heart for being like the first in-person session of that kind and just having a blast doing it. And after I got done, I was like, this feels so good. This feels right. Like this is how it's supposed to feel. Sometimes you don't always get that with the Zoom or you're like, it was good. It went well. I know people got a lot out of it, but you just don't get that feedback, that laughter, that smiling like you do in person.
Well, I would have never guessed that was your first in person. You ran that so like with expertise, with such confidence. You made everybody feel comfortable. You supported and nurtured us. You put yourself out there first to make sure that, we didn't feel like, oh my gosh, am I going to say something that just is so ridiculous or stupid? And you already have insights as to human behavior. And the emotional brain and what it's protecting. And it's protecting a lot of that, am I going to feel like I'm really part of this or I understand the instructions and that I'm accepted for the things that I say and the movements that I do. And you were very much like, I'm going to do this. And it was like, okay. And so then it made everybody feel safe and there was no feeling stupid. And I think that's just so important because a lot of people just don't get that at home. And they certainly don't get that at work. There's really not a safe space for people to be able to just be themselves, let go, not filter, not code switch, not worry. And this is why people turn to food or drugs or alcohol or mindless types of activities because it's a safe space. Social media may not be, but there are lots of things that are, and people turn to those,
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that. So in your presentation that I watched, you had a lot of amazing slides and you focused. So the conference was all about workplace wellness and how the workplace can impact people's behaviors for the better and make them happier and healthier, basically was the gist of the conference. And you see, in one of your slides, you actually talked about perceived threats in the workplace and tactics to minimize perceived threats. And so all that is to say, like you just said, the workplace sometimes is not psychologically safe. I mean, we do a lot of work to make sure it is physically safe, right? There's nothing in the aisles, there's nothing in the way. But psychologically safe is a whole nother area that I think is getting a lot of attention right now. So how do you help companies to, make sure their workplaces are psychologically safe? What can companies do to ensure that?
Dana, you've just asked the big question, like, how do we create world peace?
Right.
I will do my best
well,
there.
And tell me, please. I need to know.
So first, let me say that I love the analogy that you use with like occupational safety, because we know that almost all organizations have a huge occupational safety metrics. They put a lot of money and resources into making sure that they don't have accidents and people don't get injured and that sort of thing. But psychological safety oftentimes is just not called out. It's not part of occupational safety. The OSHA does not regulate the psychological safety and trust within the workplace. And so oftentimes it gets embedded into other initiatives that may not be able to take that on. And so if you put it into wellness is already really big and has a lot of different components. Do you put it into mental health? Who's in charge of that? Who's doing it? Do you put it into HR? Do you put it in the hands of leaders? And so because it doesn't have an obvious place and there's not somebody like looking at metrics and then calling you up and saying, hey, we noticed you've had all of these accidents. It just flies under the radar. But when you look at research studies, you'll see that psychological safety is one of the biggest factors that determines whether people are able to perform at their best, whether they are fully engaged and productive, whether they're going to stay at the company. So right now we have lots of people leaving their workplaces and finding other places to work that they are perceived is going to meet their needs in a better way. And it's not about money. The research is very clear. Paying people more money isn't the answer. If you can build trust and safety, it's a huge foundational element to not just performing well in their work, but also being healthier. And so it helps you win in wellness. It helps you win in DEI efforts. It helps you win in a lot of different places. But psychological safety and trust isn't like a thing. It's not a checklist, right? It's not like, okay, let's make sure the machines are, working properly. It's a lot harder. And people don't like that effort and that less tangible, type of mushy mush is how they see it. And it's not mushy mush because it's a business imperative and it affects the bottom line, top line, retention, turnover, health, mental health. And so it starts with leaders. And so if I were to put psychological safety somewhere, and I do a lot of work with organizations, I would put it in the hands of the CEO and the senior leaders to be responsible for this, to own it. And if there are any issues within the organization, there are always issues in leadership. It's not, sometimes I'll get those leaders that say, oh, it's totally them. No, it's not. It's you. Because you have responsibility for the culture and setting that tone. And psychological safety requires things that are hard to implement. If you've come from an authority type of organization or a hierarchy-based organization or competitive internally. And that's how a lot of organizations were set up. It's these like sales metrics. We're going to compete against each other internally to see who can get the most. And what happens is when you create competitive comparison, I'm inferior, you're better, these bell curves of, giving people their performance scores and it has to fit into a certain, bell curve or something along those lines. The lack of transparency, the minimal communication, the inauthenticity, they don't necessarily let people know when the company's struggling or not doing well. And by the time they do it, and it's already been suspected, all of that compromises, the ability for employees to have trust of the leadership in the organization and also of each other, because now they see other people as their competitors to the next promotion or in this talent pipeline. And it really erodes the morale in the culture in an organization. So just some of those elements of not micromanaging, having autonomy, being able to decide whether I work from home or not based on my job description. Obviously, if you work a production line, you're not going to assess for yourself that it's appropriate to work from home. But it's like somehow they feel like they need to say that you work a production line and so therefore you can't work at home. That's just condescending. That's just
right.
It's just a violent. It's like, okay, how do you think you're going to produce these units? Well, I need to go in. Okay, well then we're on the same page. Great, But it's this need to micromanage, to tell people what to do. The reason you hire someone is because you think that they can do what needs to be done. Trust them to do it. That is really hard for organizations to switch to that if they've been in a different mode. So I don't even know if I answered your question. It's a lot of work. And the same thing that you do to create trust in a relationship, a personal relationship, whether it's a parent-child, whether it's a romantic relationship, a friendship, there are certain elements that you do to create trust and psychological safety. And it's not that different in an organization.
I could just listen to you all day talk about this because you're so passionate and fiery about it. And in my full-time work, I am a wellness program consultant. I help companies with their employee wellness programs. And this gets brought up a lot. They want to focus on physical activity, but they also really want to focus on mental health. Mental health is, of course, a big thing right now with COVID, understandably so. But at some point, I don't have a lot of the resources. I can give mental health resources. They have employee assistance programs. They have meditation apps. And I know, I've seen the memes. I know that yoga classes and meditation apps do not solve the mental health crisis, but it is a good resource. So that's why we offer it. I understand we're not solving any mental health issues by offering a meditation app. But really, what I keep thinking in the back of my head that I can't really say, I'm not talking to the leaders, this is a culture problem. The problems you're trying to fix are a culture problem. I can give you walking challenges. I can give you physical activity resources, mental health resources, nutrition resources. We can give them a full plate of things they can use to be healthier. But if they feel like they are not psychologically safe at work and that they are not fulfilling their purpose in work, they're probably not going to like this full plate of resources we're offering them. Does that check out with you and align?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Not only that, they will reject your plate of resources and tell you to shove it in their heads because they don't feel psychologically safe enough to tell you that. And so it ends up happening. And I laugh because I had a call earlier with a client who is in charge now of developing a wellness strategy for the organization that she's with. And the organization has put together lots of different tactical things and offerings throughout the years for a ton of money, and they just don't seem to have any traction. And so in the conversation, I just mentioned and said, wellness sits in this silo and it's not connected to a lot of the other things. And I said, I can put a proposal together for you on this wellness strategy, but I can tell you that your money will not be well spent if you don't link it into some of these other facets like the culture, psychological safety, inclusion. It's all integrated when you look at it from a neuroscience perspective and just how humans behave. There's no little wellness department that just goes, oh, there are all these little wellness tools and there's a step challenge. Okay. That's just not how that works. So what ends up happening is if there's a disconnect in other aspects of the culture, the wellness is seen as an insult almost. And the research is very clear here. So what you'll get is participation and engagement from people who are already involved in wellness. They're already healthy. Yep. They've already bought into this. They have a purpose. And maybe they're more insulated from some of the things happening from a cultural perspective for a lot of different reasons. Their upbringing, their lived experiences, maybe the position that they're in. They don't feel the negative effects maybe of the culture quite as much as others. But oftentimes what wellness programs want to do is target people who really need wellness because they have high costs in terms of claims or absenteeism or presenteeism or stress related issues and back pain and blah, blah, blah. And those are the people that will persistently not participate. And the reason is that they don't feel like they're part of something. And so they've already given so much to work that they don't want to give more. It feels like giving more. It feels like extra stuff to do on top of what you're already doing. And there's some cynicism involved. There's why are you having me do this? Because it saves you money. You just want to save money and make more money. You just want to make me more productive so you can get more out of me so that you can lay off people, become leaner, and I do 3 people's jobs. And so what happens in a culture in which there's no psychological safety or trust is that even positive gestures with good intentions come across as negative. And that is a complete disaster. So you'll have a lot of that, or they just don't see the connection, or they just see it as the check the box, like, oh, you're supposed to offer wellness just so you can brag about it. Or they feel like this is an invasion of privacy. So if you don't feel cared about as a person, and then all of a sudden you want someone to do an HRA and fill out a health risk assessment and do all of these things, you're like, why are you up in my business and up in my face? Where were you when my kid was sick and I had all of these things going on and I needed a lighter workload? I didn't want to burn my FMLA. I just needed to be treated like a human being that is going through something. And when you're able to do that and people feel cared about, they don't feel like it's an invasion. They say, you care about me. And so you're asking me these questions so that you can help me and cater whatever it is that you're putting together towards me. So I don't know. I look at it as if you lay the right foundation, you don't have to spend a ton of money on wellness and DEI and this and that. What happens is some of those things will just happen naturally, or the money you do spend, you actually get a return on that investment and you see things happen with that. So that's what I'm passionate about. Why don't we create the conditions in which people can actually execute on the things that they already know that they need to do or want to do?
I can so relate to the wellness being siloed. So my experience has been either that it's siloed, so there is a focus on culture of the company, but we're not talking with wellness. So we're separate from each other and we're not integrating our approaches to help the employees. Or they're trying to combine culture with wellness, and that's not working because, like you said, the wellness piece is to target different, there are different goals that we're targeting here. But that's not going to fix how managers work with their employees and the rules and processes, procedures that are in place that are really affecting the well-being of employees. I'm not having those conversations. I can't. I mean, that's not what my job is. But I struggle feeling like, oh, we're having a limited engagement because we're not having the conversations needed. So just hearing you talk today, I'm like, oh, I needed to hear this again. Thank you.
You're not losing your mind, Dana. You're right. And I think what happens is that, again, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of courage to blow up a system and just say, you know what, it's not working. Let's start again. We really try to just patch things and band-aid things. And, senior leaders aren't staying in their positions as long as they used to. So there's really not that long-term look or sustainable type of action. But, just recently I was noticing on LinkedIn that there's been this movement towards not having marketing and sales being separate departments. Typically you have marketing and then you have sales, and there's, all kinds of stuff that goes back and forth. And I've noticed that, there've been some courageous companies that have said, why are we keeping these apart? They need to be together. They need to be integrated. The marketing and how we show up in our branding is the sales. And so that all needs to be integrated together. And I think that you are starting to see that where, people might be a chief wellness officer and that takes on some of the roles that maybe we weren't traditionally in wellness, or you have a chief people officer and the chief people officer doesn't actually do the nitty gritty of the benefits and that sort of thing. They have somebody to do that, but it's really about people. How do we care for people? And if you just look at it that way, I'm a human behavior officer, or I'm a human performance and thriving chief, or whatever it is. I mean, if we just looked at what it takes for human beings to thrive in life, it's not like it's a mystery. There's so much research and evidence to support what factors contribute to that. And there's also a lot of research to show what doesn't work. And it's shocking to see how many organizations still use methodologies, systems, and processes that clearly do not work, and they actually backfire. So a lot of the DEI work that's done in organizations, you read the research articles, not only does it not make it more inclusive, it actually makes it less inclusive sometimes, the stuff that they're doing. But it's like, check the box. It's easy. It's off the shelf. There are all of these things that, again, are you going to be that one person that goes against the grain and says, you know what, this isn't working. Let's combine things together. No, everybody wants their little position. And if you combine things, then I might lose my position. And so once again, the entire foundation of what makes a culture difficult or not as thriving is the same thing that prevents us from actually creating the system to make it thrive. And so it's like your best bet is like starting a startup and you're starting from scratch and you're only using evidence that's out there to create the culture, the systems, the processes, and to nurture and develop people in a way that, how I look at it, is they should feel so grateful that they work where they work that they wouldn't even consider going anywhere else because they feel fulfilled. Because they feel that because of work, they're actually healthier people. Because of work, their relationships are strong. Because of work, they are challenged intellectually and growing as people. That work should be the reason that people develop and thrive, not the reason that they don't. And that is what most people will say. Whether they say it to the organization or not depends. But most people will say, if it weren't for my job, I would be healthier. If it weren't for my job, I would have better relationships. If it weren't for my job, I would be happier. I would have more hobbies. What a shame that it has to be that way, or it feels like it has to be that way.
I don't know if I've ever heard it phrased like that, that you want people to say, because of my job, I am thriving. Because of my job, it is helping me to thrive and feel a purpose. From your presentation, one of the examples that stands out was you said there's an office building it's cold. So an employee complains that they are cold working there, that it's too cold for them. They have to bring jackets, whatever. And you said that the research shows that women are actually less productive when they're cold. So, a male employee might not be as affected by this cold environment, but the female employee is. And then it's affecting her whole work process. She is getting negative reviews, and then, it might lead to termination, whatever. Like, it's a whole cycle, all because it's cold. But then that employee might complain it's cold, and they say, well, this is a whole building for everyone, so we can't just change it for you. How do you approach that kind of situation? And while that's small, or it seems small to a company, that's just an example of things like this that come up.
Yeah. And there are countless things. So that's just interesting research. And I think, I'm biased in finding that research probably because I was always cold wherever I worked. And so I'd have to bring like all these sweaters and blankets and then, a space heater, and that was allowed at some companies, but not others. So I'm like, so you're going to freeze me and prohibit me from bringing a space heater. I get it, but oh my goodness. And so when I stumbled upon this research, because I teach interoception, and interoception is just basically how does a person perceive the signals coming from within their own body. And so how do you perceive hunger? How does it affect you? How do you perceive being cold or hot? How does it affect you? How does pain affect you and your productivity and your emotional intelligence and capabilities? And all of those things really influence us whether we realize it or not. And so when I stumbled upon that research that showed that men and women who report both being cold, so it's not like men weren't cold, the men and women were both cold, but the women, they had losses in productivity that were extremely significant. And of course, there were probably women who didn't, there were probably men who did, but statistically speaking, it was a significant difference. And so, you can't make climate controlled cubicles, right? Maybe that says, I'm going, like the little climate control cars, or maybe you can, I don't know.
That would be cool.
You can invent that. Yeah, please invent that.
Yeah.
But I think what it is if you're talking about inclusion and you're talking about creating a culture and a place where people can do their best, right? So that you want to make sure that they have the resources to do their best. If they cannot be as productive, literally, if you were to measure that and say you cannot be as productive when you're cold, you know, there's a chance to solve something and help that person to be more productive. You know, it's like if you found that a certain aspect of the business and supply chain, it wasn't as productive as it could be, and there was waste going on, you would put a team together to solve that. And so what you do about that is you really take a step back to say, how much flexibility do we have? And that's the first thing I will, talk to managers, supervisors, and directors about. Yes, I understand that these people work. So I go to places where there's a minus 46 degree freezer that people have to step into and work, right? Because that's what's required. Right. That's where their, the medicines are or whatever. And so it's
sure.
Okay, that is going to be required. How do we help them to be able to navigate that particular job better? What else can we offer? Can they listen to music while they're doing that? Is that a safety violation? If you think it's a safety violation, do you have the metrics to support that? So some of the things that I have noticed is that we conveniently use or not use information and metrics and evidence when it suits us. And so there will be evidence to say, yes, this shows that when you have this going on, it's a safety hazard, right? If you have air traffic controllers working for too many minutes consecutively, planes seem to crash. Okay, so now we base their schedules based on that. We don't want to get on an airplane with a really tired air traffic controller that misses, the little blip on the radar. And I've worked with air traffic controllers, so that has been studied. But then it's like, do you have evidence to show? Did you compare having music on versus not music on and show that this was an issue? Do we have evidence to support that? No. Really, what it boils down to is people can't agree on the music, so we just took it away from everybody. Okay, so when I start to ask for those sorts of things, because sometimes when you go into these places, and the place I'm giving you is an example, because I was brought into a place that had a very low morale, bad culture, a lot of complaints, infighting, just all kinds of stuff. People just wouldn't show up for work because they were just so mad about things. And one of the big wins was for them to listen to music. And I just thought, oh my goodness, if we could reduce the amount of animosity that's going on here with some music, how fantastic is that? And so when we started to peel back the layers as to why they weren't listening to music, like they thought it was safety, so-and-so said this. And I'm like, I need to see how this decision happened and what it was based on. It was literally that. And so when we resolved that, which was we're going to switch radio stations every day, so that way, we get a variety or whatever it was that we came up with, it was like, oh my goodness, people were so happy about that. And it's just having a voice sometimes. And so it's just this notion of just listening to people, understanding where they're coming from and explaining things, because I think we all remember when we were kids and saying, can I have this or can I do this? And your parents would say no. And you would say, why? And they'd say, because I said so, or because I'm your parent. That kind of sucks to hear that, because it just sounds like you're too dumb to understand the explanation, or there isn't a good one. I'm just being a jerk and I'm just trying to, ruin your life, or whatever it is that your perception might be. And so when somebody asks and you don't have a good answer and you sort of answer it in a parental way of because I said so, because I'm the boss, because that's just the way it is, because that's the way it's always been, all bad words, all bad phrases to use, all creating mistrust, all diminishing voice and autonomy. Sometimes just listening and just saying, wow, that must be really hard to come into work every single day and feel really cold. Why don't we brainstorm some solutions, or why don't you come up with some solutions of what we could do, considering that other people don't feel cold or other people might not perceive it this way, and let's see what we can do. And you'd be surprised. Employees have really great ideas that leaders, managers, directors may not think of. So that's the other component. Sometimes just being heard and then allowing for that person to provide solutions. It doesn't mean that you have to solve everything for everyone, because each person's different. It could be sounds for me. It could be the lighting and the fluorescent lighting for me. It could be uniforms. I'm autistic, so like textures are a real issue for me. And I remember working when I was young at Burger King or Chick-fil-A. Those were my first jobs. And having these uniforms that were just so hard for me to feel good in because of the texture and material, so we don't think about those things. And because I'm autistic, because I have a kid that's autistic, maybe I'm just more sensitive. And I really talk about this notion of neurodiversity. There are a lot of neurodiverse people in workplaces and in schools and everywhere that we go. And, they're already not entering the workforce at the rate that they could be and should be. They have a lot of things to offer. And because of our practices, they're excluded a lot of times. But once they get in to an organization, are we really accommodating and creating environments where everyone can thrive? And so open spaces aren't for everybody. I understand that not everyone can have a posh office with windows overlooking the city skyline. However, there are things that you can do to create safe spaces where people actually can work and be productive. Nobody wants to go to work and not feel productive and then feel like they didn't get anything done and that they have to do their work somewhere else or after hours. Nobody wants that. So it's not like people are showing up and saying, you know what, today I'm just going to screw around and just collect a paycheck. Nobody feels good about that. And the evidence doesn't support that happens. But I hear it from leaders all the time. If we don't micromanage, if we don't do this, they're just going to slack off and not do their work. Show me the evidence on that and we'll talk, because it's not there.
Right. Well, and then there's always the answer to, well, we've always done it this way. It's always been this way. So, and that kind of relates to the music thing. Well, it's always been this way because that rule was put into place because there was an issue a long time ago and people couldn't agree on the music. So we put this rule into place. It's always been this way. Sorry, kind of thing. And that's really hard to hear too. And that's kind of a sign, like you said, of not listening.
And it's such a cop out from the perspective that there's nothing in a business that they're doing like that they were doing 20 years ago. So much changes every single year that it's like, you pull that line on me and great, I'm going to make you run this business like it's 1990. And we're going to see how far you get, how you compete against your competitors and win any clients over. I can guarantee you that you have changed some things. So don't pick and cherry pick what you're going to say it's always been this way for, because people aren't dumb, right? They're not ignorant to those things. They see that things have changed and that it changes depending on who's there. So I remember being part of a corporation. It was like something didn't make sense to me when something doesn't make sense to me. It's hard for me to let it go. You could probably see that about me. And I'm just like, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. And they're like, well, this rule is in place, blah, 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 and all of this stuff. As soon as somebody else came in, they were like, this doesn't make sense. And they changed it like this. It was like such an easy thing to do that you see that people's beliefs, their cognitive biases, how they see the world, a lot of times is the gatekeeper to change. It's the gatekeeper to common sense or to moving something forward. And no one should have that much power to prevent change that might be necessary or helpful because they only see it one particular way. And that's why hearing from lots of people and getting voices together is such an important aspect of trust and autonomy and mastery and purpose and the things that really make human beings tick.
Yeah. And I'm thinking back to your presentation just because it was so memorable to me. I mean, you know how people take pictures in conferences, they'll take a picture of the slides and the speakers always say, you have access to these slides later. Like, don't worry, you'll be able to download them. But there's something about taking a picture of slides because you actually look at your gallery more than you're going to visit like the conference website later and stuff. So I don't know. I always mark that as a sign of like people are into this when they're taking pictures of slides. So all that to say, I took a lot of pictures of your slides from that day. And one of them was one about the perceived threats in the workplace, which we've kind of talked about. And then you gave some tactics to minimize threats. And some of the tactics were growth mindset, allow mistakes and to encourage risks, adventure and opportunity, and encourage self-expression. And when I heard these tactics, I was like, oh, like improv, these are the same lessons that you learn from improv. These are the same lessons I get when I'm taking improv class and when I'm teaching an applied improv, like these are the same things. So like, how can we connect this or like even just, I don't care where people get it from. Like, just like, how can we help people in workplaces to learn these tactics? So, how are you encouraging companies to have a better culture using these kind of tactics?
Yeah, I think that, it depends on the company and, and what level I'm working with. But, you want to teach the elements of a growth mindset. And growth mindset is really just focused on, you really can't learn and develop unless you take some risks and you are a beginner and you accept that you're not going to be good at things until you do them over and over and over again. And that your ability is much more related to how much effort you put into something than just natural talent. So it de-emphasizes this natural talent and more focuses on effort, and that anyone can really develop skills and capabilities if they put effort into it. And so that way it's rewarding more of a process versus just a result or an outcome. There are a lot of dangers with doing that. And so it's really about training, the mindset. We grow up, I think, in a society that's more fixed mindset. It reveres natural talent and abilities. You see it in sports. So I worked with a lot of athletes over the years, and you just learn a lot about human performance working in the sports and athletic world. But you just see this emphasis on results, 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 and this natural talent. And the danger with that is that, people who have natural talents are not always willing to work hard on the things that they're not good at. And so they become very, one track or two track, but it's hard to make them more multifaceted. And then they don't take risks because they're afraid of looking bad and not being great at something. And that is actually, the growth mindset is more associated with success than, results or outcomes or IQ and those sorts of standardized measures that oftentimes we use. And so you have to train people to have a growth mindset. And you also have to create an atmosphere in which when a message is communicated that maybe goes against that people feel the authority to say something in a kind way, because we're all working on this together to say, oh, what you just said felt a little fixed mindset to me, and I'm really working on my growth mindset. And unfortunately, organizations oftentimes they're just not set up that way. So people just don't share or say, I was offended, or, that comment that you made is just not reflective of our values. And so you really have to create this expectation that we want to have a growth mindset. We really want people to take risks, because you can't really innovate without risk taking. I mean, corporations always talk about innovation, but what you'll see is that they want all these great ideas, but then they want proof of concept. Like, okay, what's the proof out there that this works? And it's like, it's an innovation. It's an innovation. There isn't any proof.
Right.
Like, that's the whole point here. I mean, when people developed these like shared ride services, there wasn't a proof of concept that this would work or be any better than taking a taxi or renting a car. So somebody had to take the risk that we didn't even know we wanted that or needed that in our lives. We didn't know that we needed a Netflix type of service until it came along. We would have just wanted more blockbusters sitting around, So somebody has to take a risk to say, wow, we have this vision, or we see this possibility of what the future could be like. Let's do something with that. And there are lots of organizations that have really, really skilled and passionate people who come up with phenomenal ideas, and then it's squashed right away because it's a risk, because it hasn't been proven, and it really kills the passion and creativity with an organization. So, I look at the improv, and of course I wouldn't have seen it that way, at the time. I just saw it as, oh my goodness, like that pressure to say something, because I would kind of play along in my head when I would say, whose line is it anyway? And I would be like, I don't know what I would say right now. And so, what you don't realize is that there is practice and training behind improv to some degree, right? Like, it is effort based, that you can practice those types of skills and get out of your own way and get out of your head and things along those lines. And so I didn't see that connection. But when I went to your improv class, I could see right away being in there this notion of just being in the moment. So being in the present moment is such an important aspect of listening, of creating psychological safety and trust, of good performance and productivity. And you can't really be anywhere else. You have to be there, right? And you're using your body and you're using your voice and you're feeling things as it's happening. So it's a really integrative process, the improv. And we know that when we recruit the body along with our mind and our emotions, it really makes a huge difference. And if you think about corporations, most people don't have to engage the body to do the work that they're doing. And it's a travesty,
Right.
because if we could engage the body more through play, through art, through just lots of different things that we could do, right? If we did a little improv or a little, body use, that's not just exercise based, of course. People think about exercise, but there are many other things that can be done. It opens up this whole innovative aspect of ourselves. It opens up that creativity. It opens up more connections, within the brain. And so, when people try to ideate, right, like the brainstorming sessions, like they set a meeting, it's usually inconvenient for people. They bring them together. They have all this work to do. So they're multitasking. They're really in their cognitive brain. And what happens is there's nothing about that supports creativity and ideating. Like literally, we would get our best ideas when we're on the toilet, in the shower, taking a walk and doing
Right.
relaxing activities, because you have to be in a parasympathetic state. You have to be in a bit of a relaxed state to make that happen. But we're constantly asking people to ideate and come up with, the solutions to the company's problems in a very sympathetic fight or flight type of state. And it doesn't work. So I feel like there's just so much that improv can teach us, about having that growth mindset, adventure, looking at your workday as an adventure. And instead of saying, oh gosh, we've got this problem with this client and this product, it's an adventure. It's an adventure that something went wrong. I mean, a movie is not exciting unless something goes wrong. Like that's part of the script of a movie.
That's true.
Or a sitcom episode. There has to be an issue, and there has to be something that helps you to overcome the issue and a lesson that you learn. And, there's always that formula. And I think that business lends itself to really be a hero's journey for people, and everyone can experience that. And we have to create the parameters to make it feel like this is an adventure. This is an opportunity. This is a pick your own adventure type of book. It brings out passion and creativity in people, and it really gets them to really love something for the sake of loving it versus showing up because I have to, because you said you were going to pay me and give me health benefits. It's a totally different feeling, right? So that's where I'm trying to, help organizations move to. And I think that what you do is fantastic, because if I had to tell an organization, where do I think your money is best spent on more training, required training online about blah, 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 or bring Dana in to do some improv for people and really get them to understand how to use this in a way that can help everybody. Oh my gosh, like forget that other blah, 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 check the box type of training. This is a million times more useful and more effective.
You are the best. You said it so much better than me. Like that's exactly what we're trying to do here. And, growth mindset is the same as yes and mindset, right? And yes and isn't about saying yes to everything. Growth mindset is not about saying yes to everything, but it's the want to grow. And yes and is the want to keep the scene going, the reality going, whatever it is. It's saying yes to the reality and adding to it. So if you have a growth mindset, you might get an idea and say, oh, we could do this in the company. And then we could do this. And then we could do this. But, if your company's a very no but kind of company, they'll say, no, that won't work. We don't do it this way. We've never done it this way. But if you keep saying yes and you actually might find the solution after 4 or 5 ands that you never would have gotten to because you said no.
True. And people feel like they're being paid to say no, or to be negative, or to find the flaws in things. People will say that in my courses. They'll say, I get paid to think about why things won't work. Okay, I get it. I understand. I run a company, like I understand that you have to think of potential pitfalls and all of that, but not in the very first stage of things, not in the dreaming aspect, not in the vision, not in the what could be, right? Like imagine the rideshare service. I mean, I don't really know that much about the ins and outs of it, but it's like somebody imagined this, and I'm sure because it didn't exist, other people were like, why would people do that? Like, what?
Why wouldn't you take a cab, a taxi?
Yeah, like I don't
right?
understand this whole thing that just, and you could find a million things that could have been wrong with it. And maybe some of those things did in fact happen, right? But it doesn't get off the ground and it doesn't become as big as it is, right? We're all using that. When I go to the third world countries and everyone's using something like that, that is like, wow. Talk about a go-to-market that really spread very quickly and into places that there are still things that we invented 20 years ago that never made it into some of these places, So to me, that's significant. The Airbnb type of, industry as well. Like who knew that would be something that would work? And so I think that in organizations, there are really great ideas that people kibosh really, really early on without letting it develop and stew. You got to marinate in things sometimes. And, when you let people give their ideas, even if it doesn't happen, but they were able to be heard and they were able to have a life somewhere, whether it's a ideating board or whatever it might be, or maybe they apply and they win like little grants to implement something and try it out. Like, wouldn't that be fun to have like a grant funding in each corporation and, you apply to implement your idea and then it gets you practice with like creating an idea and metrics and evaluation and, did it work? Did it not work? And it really helps people develop skills. I've never said this before. I'm coming up with it right now because I'm like, oh, that would be a good idea. And then people apply for it and they get these grants and then you see what happens. And so you never know. I sat on an advisory board for PepsiCo and their flaming hot something or other, one of their flavors was invented by somebody who worked in the plant and had this idea. And they were given the ability to test out some flavors and put things together. And it became a huge selling product. And this guy who just, worked in a plant somewhere became really famous within the company because he had invented this flavor, and not the food chemist, not the food scientist. And they have plenty of those. It was somebody that just knew the flavors of his culture and really had this vision. And it was fantastic. And so there are so many people just like him in organizations and nonprofits and government and schools. And if we give them a chance and we don't suck the life out of them, and we let them be themselves, that's like one of my goals for my son. My son is very creative and inventive, but he has some self-control issues sometimes, excessive talking. I don't know where he gets that from. And my goal for him in school is for him not to get straight A's necessarily. It's for him to be able to retain his passion, to retain his creativity, while going to school without those things being completely squashed and taken out of him because of the environment, because of the way that we do things. And I think that many people already enter the workforce stuffed in this box of how things need to be and how you're supposed to behave. And we're missing out on opportunities to really tap into a lot of what people have to offer.
Gosh, I love it. I mean, you say everything so well, and it really does make people think. So I'm hoping it sounds like you're gaining traction within companies. I know it's a hard discussion, but I want to ask you too, kind of to switch gears a bit, just about your public speaking experience. Clearly you're a fantastic speaker, very engaging. And I remember in your presentation, you mentioned that you are autistic. And I was kind of surprised by that, just because you just enthralled me. Like, I was like, this is such a good presentation. And not to say, I don't know, I'm not sure what bias I had or any kind of thoughts. I'm gonna just get myself out of this hole that I'm spinning here.
You're fine.
I was so impressed that you shared that you were vulnerable with us. And I just felt like it added to the vulnerability that you already had in the presentation. So can you just tell us a little bit about what your speaking journey's been like. Did you always love it, or have you had to learn to love it?
Yeah, that I did not always love it. I wasn't always comfortable or even good at it. And I didn't know that I was autistic for a long time. And then once I learned, I didn't share it with people. So I'll tell you about that. And they're probably interrelated, these two things. I was painfully shy as a young child. I felt like I didn't always understand other people. So I felt socially disconnected. I felt like I didn't understand why friends would get mad at me, or I didn't understand the way that they interacted or spoke. It was just hard for me to always manage that. As a female, I've learned that's autistic. Females tend to be a little bit better at learning and memorizing social skills as they go through life and they see what people do. They observe and they learn and they begin to incorporate those skills. I don't know why that seems to be the case. And of course, if you've met one person who's autistic, you've met one person who's autistic because we're all different. But I think what happens is there's this stereotype of autistic people being like Rain Man, right, in the movie. With Tom Cruise, and that, we do these math calculations in our heads and we, do this all the time. And that, that's just not the case. Right. And so,
Right. Totally.
So looking back in my life, I'm like, oh, yeah, I could totally see how I was autistic. I didn't understand jokes, but I would laugh along because I didn't want to feel left out. Sometimes I would take things literally. I was book smart, but then struggled with common sense types of things. Like I always give the examples, like I walk into a bathroom and I look at the faucets and I go, do I know how to work these faucets? Because those are the kinds of things I've literally had to call the front desk at a hotel and say, I do not know how to turn on your shower or find the hot water. And so those are the types of things I struggle with. Although I can, study and memorize a bunch of things and put concepts together. And so I think that what happened is as I went to school and developed more confidence in myself, I got braver. And so I think that college was a time that I really grew as a person. I think being away from home, being in a new environment, it's like, sink or swim type. I struggled in certain things, but one of the things that I did is I really loved my nutrition class, my general nutrition class. And so it was like 600 people. It was in a theater auditorium. I went to University of Florida. So there's a lot of people in some of these, 101 type classes. And so I liked the class so much that I became friends with the professor. And I just said to him, can I teach your class sometime? Because I liked talking about the concepts. And usually it was reserved for graduate students to do this type of work. And he was like, yeah, I teach Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 3 to 4. Fridays would be great. So I could go to happy hour. And I was like, okay. And so I just volunteered to teach the class, and the class loved me. The class was like, oh my gosh, we understand the concepts well. And that's where I learned that I could explain things in a simple way that other people could understand. And I think that's my autistic brain. So sometimes I will be confused by things and I'll say, clearly these instructions were not written from a neurodiverse perspective, because there are patterns maybe in the way that we think. And so the way that I would explain things, it worked not just for autistic people. It seemed to work. It was like a more foundational type of speaking or connecting the dots. And so then I started little study groups for like biochemistry, and we'd go to class, but then I would hold another little class and I'd re-explain the concepts. And so that helped me to learn, but it also helped others to learn because they didn't learn necessarily in the same way as the professor taught it. When I started giving formal presentations, they were not fun because they were like these assignments, right? And so I was just like, and then of course you feel like you have to do it a certain way. And then they're grading you on your and, did you pace too much? And so in those environments, I didn't do well because I felt like I couldn't be myself. I felt like I had to fit into this idea. Like I would suck at Toastmasters, yet I'm a keynote speaker and I speak on the stage to thousands of people. I probably violate 10 Toastmaster rules. I don't know, or these speak blah, 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 but that's not what the best of me is. The best of me is to have this scientific knowledge that I can translate into things that people not only understand, but that they can apply it in their lives. And it's me just being me. So let me pace, let me use my hands, let me say my ums, just let me be. And I'm much more effective. And so that really didn't take place until after my master's. My master's, I still struggled because I just couldn't fit into what they wanted from a presenter. But once I got out into the working world and I got my very first job where I was able to just do my thing, then I felt this natural way, and I worked teaching things in English and in Spanish. I worked with a lot of refugees and immigrants in nutrition. And I would designed classes and I would have the parents there and kids, and I would have people of all ages. I would work with homeless people. I'd go into senior centers. And what I learned was how to connect with people and, what is it that they were there to do? And if you can really think about being in their shoes and what they might be struggling with and what they might want to learn. And then most of all, how do I actually make this work in my real life? That's where my public speaking really comes from. It's from that perspective as a person who wants to hear things in a way that I understand. And I want to hear things in a way that's meaningful to my life. And I want to be able to use the information in some way. And so when I do that, I don't know, stuff just comes out of my mouth. Like I said to you, I guess I do improv because I create these slides, but I really don't plan what I'm going to say. You said, I'm going to send you the things we're going to talk about ahead of time. I'm like, okay. But like, I don't really do that, right? Because I want to just use what I know to explain things in a way that I feel like is accessible to people or meaningful to them. And I want to be able to do it naturally as me. So, for example, I did some shows for Telemundo for the Spanish speaking channel, and I had to read off of the teleprompter. And it's just torture for me. You just don't get the best of me off of a teleprompter at all. So it's like, that's just not Raquel. That's just not the best of me. It just sounds empty. And it's, and so now I do some local NPR stuff here. I do a little Be Well with Raquel show a couple times a year, and it's a call-in show. And I like it because it's like we pick a topic, kind of like you and I just did, and people call in and they ask questions. And sometimes they're asking questions I have no idea what they're going to ask. And they ask questions about gas or something, like something really kind of off the wall or, and so, and I like that. That just suits me more naturally. I just try to be authentic. And so I got diagnosed as autistic when my oldest child was 4.
Okay.
He got diagnosed as autistic. I knew that my child was autistic, but it still took like 2 more years for the formal diagnosis. And I went to 2 specialists, and in the process, because now everything's so advanced, when I was growing up, it's like I would have never been flagged for autism because I didn't do the classic, types of things that we stereotype, right? But when she got diagnosed, they said, well, now we have genetic testing. We have all of these things. We know that there's a genetic component. We can already tell that you're the one with the autism, like that's autistic. And so then when she got diagnosed, I got diagnosed. And, there's a part of you that feels like, oh my gosh, my whole life makes sense to me. And then there's a part of you that says, oh my goodness, like my poor kid is going to be like me, like struggle with all of these things and it's my fault. But I remember also telling my dad, and explaining autism now in the new world and what we know about it, and saying to my dad, I think you're autistic. And, and my dad just said, oh my gosh, like my whole life is explained to me. I really thought there was something wrong with me. Like he'd been holding all of these things in, but I could see it. And then I could see it in his family. And, we've talked about that. So it was really I'm very grateful because, it really just helped me to understand myself more. And it doesn't mean that I was ready to say it because I felt like it was going to be used against me in some way. I worked for an organization and I just didn't feel like I could say those things and then still be seen as a leader, as a content creator, as having these skills. I thought it would work against me. And this is why a lot of people don't want to be diagnosed with anything. And then I learned I had ADHD. And so I just took my Adderall before coming on with you because it keeps me more focused. Imagine me without Adderall. So, and so so for a long time, I didn't say anything, and I didn't say anything until I already started my company. And then even then I was like, if I tell clients that I'm autistic, they may not use me as a vendor because they think that I'm not going to be able to do certain things, right? People don't imagine an autistic person being a public speaker on stage and doing these sorts of things. But now I feel like that's just really a disservice. And so I really try to live into authenticity. And so I say it because I want people to realize that the stereotypes that they have about autistic people are just not correct, that there are autistic people in all types of work. They're your doctors, they're your teachers, they are in government, they're, yes, they might be engineers and I don't know, computer people, and I don't know what people stereotype us as, but we're in all different industries all around the world. I worked for the military, a lot of autistic people in special forces. And I'm telling you, they wouldn't do as good of a job if they weren't autistic. So, we have autistic people to thank for a lot of different capabilities that we have today and innovations. And so I like to break that stereotype now. And sometimes I say it because I need help. And asking for help is something that I've had a hard time doing for a lot of different reasons, but it's something I'm still working on it. My girlfriend told me I need to keep working on it, but I'm getting better at asking for help on things like if I don't travel for a while, I'm a very routines person and I have all of these things in place. And so if I don't travel for a while, when I do travel, it's harder for me to manage. It's harder for me to have the routines. And so after the pandemic, I went back to traveling. It's like I've traveled my whole career. I've gone to 49 countries or something. And I went back after the pandemic and I was like, I don't know how to travel. And so I was just struggling with everything. And I just remember being at the airport and just saying, hi, I'm autistic and I need help right now. It was like, I can't remember what it was, but it was like I needed help navigating something or figuring something out. And I didn't have the bandwidth for it. I remember like sitting there in my chair at one point in the gate and I had like, if I had had a weighted blanket with me, I would have just like covered myself in it. I was overstimulated. I was stressed. It may have been this trip to San Diego. I don't remember, but I just said to someone, I'm autistic and I need help. Can you help me with this? And I think that's a good thing. That's a good thing to be able to just say that. And then someone goes, oh, okay, I'm willing to help you.
Did they help?
Yeah. Yes. And it was so much easier because then when I'm struggling with it, inevitably what happens is you start to go, why am I the only one that can't do this? Or why am I struggling? And then you start to beat yourself up and be self-critical about it. And I remember just doing that growing up. I just remember saying, you're in the gifted program. Why can't you do this? I always felt inferior. I felt like they had done some kind of incorrect IQ testing and I didn't know I wasn't gifted. I didn't know why I couldn't do certain things. And it was just really hard. I felt like I couldn't live up to this expectation that, people had of me for being gifted. I was like, I don't want to be gifted. I don't want to be gifted. And so what I learned is that we all have things that we might be naturally good at or inclined for, and we have things that we might struggle with. Our brains are designed very differently. We can't wire for everything. The brain has to pick and choose. And so it wires based on a lot of different factors. And what we want to do is embrace everybody's unique wiring, because if everybody were wired the same way, we wouldn't have this wonderful world. And so, yeah. And so that's sort of my public speaking journey, is just, be myself and try not to be anybody else. Like I can't be anybody else when I speak. I can certainly learn things from other people and say, oh, that's really interesting. I might give that a whirl next time. And I take a lot of risks when I'm presenting. And the autistic piece of me, I think, helps me in certain things. I think certainly to explain and connect dots. And then there are certain ways that I think it works against me as well. And I think you just have to accept me. I always say, I'm a package. I'm not for everyone. And that's okay. I'm going to be for some people and not for other people. And that's probably true of all of us. And if we try to be for everybody, we lose ourselves in the process. And so it's really just about being yourself and finding your people. And so that's how I look at it. I don't know if that answered your question, Dana.
It sure did. I'm applauding you. I'm just saluting you, bowing to you. What a journey. I mean, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing. I love I'm me. Like, I'm here in front of you, bringing all of myself. This is me. You might not like me talking fast. You might not like my pacing, but you know what? This is me. This is what I do. And I'm in Toastmasters, and that actually has been the big lesson. I wanted to conquer my fear, so I joined it to do, and I did. It really helped me. But then it kind of got a little micro focused on the ahs and ums and oh, you should move here and there. You should move purposefully, kind of thing. And it was more like laser focused. And I was like, I think we're missing the big picture of like how people feel too when I'm speaking and what are they getting out of it. And you've just been an inspiration for this of just like, this is me. I'm coming here as me. I'm presenting as me. You're getting me right now. The good, the bad, and whatever in between.
Yeah. And it's like, I think we're also very judgmental as human beings, right? And I think that the more we can have a variety of people out there, that they don't have to have the perfect voice or the perfect this or that we're more accepting of what we're seeing and what we're experiencing. I think that that's better for everybody, because there are people out there who have so much to offer in a certain capacity, but because of this one thing and this expectation, and a lot of those are bias based, the expectation of how people look or how people dress or how they come across or what happens when you have tattoos or a face piercing. And those things get in the way of us being able to access what people have to offer and the talents that they have, the skills and capabilities that they've built, just who they are as people. And so that's part of the DEI work, is that yes, a lot of the DEI work is focused on things that you can see in terms of, race, ethnicity, gender. But we also need to create more diversity and inclusion around the non-seen things, the way that I think or the lived experiences that I bring to the table. And that we need to drop some of these standards, because the standards that have been created, again, where did they originate? What were they based on?
Mm-hmm.
And what we'll find out is that they originate and based in privilege, and they're based in a non-inclusion type scenario. And, as a person who obviously was born and grew up a majority of my time without the internet in that world, right. I also entered the workforce where women were required to wear pantyhose, or there were certain, so there were requirements for attire that, felt biased, or there were uniforms that were very structured, what I would consider very, masculine feeling or looking, without a lot of choices to go outside of that. And so I experienced it. I've experienced what business is done on the golf course. I've experienced, a lot of different things that felt very exclusionary to me as a female, as a Hispanic person who's a first generation born to a refugee and an immigrant, as an LGBTQIA person, with who's also autistic and ADHD. I can probably make a list of so many exclusionary moments in my career, and not just in my career, but out in the community, out in real life, Mm-hmm. And so I think that this is part of what I do. It's all, it feels like I do too much maybe, but really what I do is I just help to create the conditions for all human beings to have a chance to fulfill their potential, to grow, to develop, and to be happy and healthy as they want to be, the way that they see fit. And so in that effort, you have to have more diversity. You have to be more inclusionary. You have to drop some of these biases and stereotypes, and not that they're just going to go away. It's kind of like you were talking and then you were nervous that you were saying the wrong thing about, being autistic and the implication that maybe I can't. And actually what we want to do is we want to create an ability for you to just say that and say, am I saying the right thing? And for me to say, no, it's totally fine, because we're all different. And it's really about, just for me, I like to say I'm autistic. There are other people that like to say I have autism. Within the autistic community, they battle about that. How I look at it is somebody's pronouns. It's like he, she, they, them, whatever. what is it that you want to be called? It's you that wants to be addressed. Let me know. So if I say, I like to say I am autistic as an identity, like it's part of me, then, let's just have that conversation, right? I understand where stereotypes and biases come from and how they're reinforced. But if we're able to just freely have this conversation and you say, listen, I didn't know that autistic people, whatever it is, really did those sorts of things because this is what I've heard, then it's an opportunity to have a conversation about that and where that comes from. You know what I mean? So that transparency, that ability to have conversations without needing to be right or wrong, or good or bad. It's just like, here's the good or bad and everything in between. It's like, what if it's just, here I am, and this is who I am. And so are you willing to have an open mind based on how I look or how I come across or what I say? And maybe we find something that we have in common or something that we can learn from each other. And I just think that we have much more in common with each other than the differences that we have, if we're willing to look at that. And so because I've traveled all around the world and I say, really, we're all so similar, but we just really emphasize the differences, and differences are good to emphasize in a positive way. But when we're using them to alienate or to isolate or to build walls instead of bridges, or to say you're bad and I'm good, that's where everything kind of goes awry. And it's happening in our workplaces. It's happening we see that right out in society. So I don't know where I started, but that's where I ended.
And it was a beautiful ending. I mean, I'm just sitting here taking mental notes because how beautiful is that though? Like, I'm here, I'm me. Like, and we've talked before, I think you mentioned in the presentation too, like people aren't going to always like you. You're really tough when you talk to people. You say, okay, you said that you want to make this a big thing. You want wellness, you want DEI, you want culture to be a big focus, and yet you don't have a budget to go with it. There's a disconnect. And so you're calling people out, and you might not get liked by everyone, and that's okay too. You realize that people aren't going to like you. Yeah, you're used to it.
I'm used to that. And I think that for me, it's just very easy to look at my purpose and values and just to use that. I think that is the more autistic side of me, where it's the things that motivate me or the things that I'm willing or not willing to do. It's like money doesn't talk to me, position doesn't talk to me. It's doing the right thing. And it's become apparent to me in organizations that not everybody functions this way. When I was like, well, I'm willing to take a pay cut in order to help the, employees, and everyone's just like crickets. Like no one agrees with that. Right. And so for me, it's just very easy to say, if you're not going to stand behind what you want to do and you're not going to resource it, you're not really taking it seriously, right? And so so I'm just going to say it. They may not like it, but I also don't want to work with them either if that's how it's going to be, because that doesn't make any sense. This is like somebody saying, no, I want you to trust me. And then you see that they're lying all the time and cheating on you. And then they go, but just trust me. It'll never happen again, And so I feel like I'm in these like abusive relationships sometimes with a client where they're like, we want everyone to thrive. Well, what's your budget? And it's just some ridiculous number, but they spend more on the lawsuits that happen because they didn't put anything in place. And I'm like, you didn't have money to invest in developing the culture or the people, but you did have about $1 billion sitting around to do these payouts to people, right? So we just saw that
the holiday party at the end of the year.
Or the alcohol. I say, give me a breakdown of how much money you spend on food and alcohol in a year, and then I'll tell you what you take seriously, right? So, and I know that's how people celebrate and do this. Well, guess what? The research does not support that. The research doesn't support that the way you retain people is to get them really drunk and then have some date rapes occur at your sales convention. This is not the way that it usually happens, right? And so maybe you like to drink. Yeah, maybe people like to drink. Yeah, people like to gamble too, but we're probably not promoting that at the workplace, right? there are good ways to spend money and invest in people. And again, those require more effort and more thought and more strategy. And it's just really easy to hire a party planner to, have a bunch of food and alcohol and be like, we did it. We made everybody feel good. After we killed them this year, burned them out,
Right.
and drove up our profit, shares or prices by laying people off and making them work double. We threw them a holiday party and it's all okay. It's all good. Okay, pat yourself
We
on the
burned
back.
them out.
Yeah, but I will be calling you out. And so I'm not your person. I'm not the person to bring in, If we're going to sing Kumbaya and talk about how great you are when there are clearly issues, I'm not your person. There are plenty of people that will do that if you pay them. I'm not one of them. And so yeah, does it cut me out of some of the work that people are getting? Absolutely. Am I as profitable and bringing as much revenue? Probably not. However, I can sleep at night and I feel good about what I'm doing. And that to me is really, really important. So I wouldn't trade that.
Yeah, you can sleep at night because you're being yourself. You're bringing your full self to the table, and you're bringing up questions that people aren't asking. And yeah, it does make some people uncomfortable, and then that may lead to judgments and biases. But at the end of the day, you are saying, I'm bringing myself. I brought myself to the table, and I have brought nothing less. And that's what you got out of me. And I love that because I'm so in my head a lot. Improv has helped, but I'm like so in my head and I'm a people pleaser. And I listen to you and I'm just like, oh, hallelujah. Like I need to just hang around you all day, every day, and just get this thick skin and backbone. I'm so inspired and motivated by you.
Thanks, Dana. I mean, I don't recommend that everybody just go and do these things.
Sure.
It has to come naturally to you. If not, it doesn't, it doesn't work for me all the time and it comes naturally to me. Right. But, I think you have to work within the parameters that are you, but you build upon some of those skills. So if you notice that excessive people pleasing, a lack of boundary setting is really getting in the way of you being able to, fulfill your purpose or do some of the activities that you want, or you feel angry while you're doing some of these things, then it's an opportunity to work on that. It doesn't have to be done Raquel style where I'm like, boom, drop the mic, right? Like it doesn't have to be done that way. And I've tried to incorporate kinder ways of saying things. And, I used to be way more judgmental and way more blunt. So that is an aspect of the autism spectrum that I think I encapsulated very perfectly for a long time, was how blunt and lack of filter that I had. It was just like, this is it. This is what I say. And this is it, whether it hurts your feelings or not. And I've been able to learn how to put myself in other people's shoes. And that's a hard thing sometimes for certain people that are neurodiverse to do and experience that. And I think being a parent has helped me. But I think that the neuroscience studies have helped me to understand that I'm the only person that sees and experiences life the way that I do, and everybody else is experiencing it differently. And so I need to listen to how they're experiencing things, and then also to know that all human behavior makes sense in the context in which it occurred. And that's one of the things I teach over and over again in my programs, is that whatever you did, whatever you said, it made sense in the context in which it occurred. And if we can look at everybody else's behaviors that way, it really helps to say, okay, why is this leader being so difficult? Why is this leader digging their heels in? What's going on here? And if we just look at it as, oh my gosh, like sometimes my first inclination to say, what a jerk. They're so short-sighted. They don't see the long-term, blah, 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 like all of these things that I know exist in the science, right? But at the same time, I am able to take a step back and say that person is also just being a human, and that's protecting their position, maybe protecting things that have happened to this person in their lives. And we all develop coping skills and a way of seeing the world to help us to navigate and to overcome challenges and to endure some of the things that we go through that are unimaginable sometimes, unspeakable in some cases. And so I try to keep that in mind so that I can then say, is there an approach that I could take that would help this person to feel safe or to not feel threatened, where we can both move forward and create a win-win? I want to help the people in the organization but this person is also scared of looking bad or taking a risk, or how can I help this person to not feel so unsafe? And if we can find some common ground, I can work with that. I do turn away clients where I just feel like their entire approach and everything is really to exploit their employees.
Mm-hmm.
Then I just, if there's no way to navigate through that and around it, then that's just not going to work out for me. Just because I'm limited on how much I can do on one person. And every time I say yes to one thing, I'm potentially saying no to other things or other people or other organizations. And so I try to strategically choose where I can have impact, where we have an understanding that we can move forward together, even if things aren't ideal. And so I do have that capability that I think before I really lacked. I'm embarrassed sometimes when I think about moments as a leader in my past when I worked with organizations or even working with clients and patients, when I didn't have all of this training and some of my approaches and some of the things I said. I feel mortified about now that I know what I know. I mean, and all I can do is, when you know better, you do better, as Maya Angelou's quote says. And so that's what I try to focus on. But if I look back and reflect, and I'm going to admit to mistakes and who I was and versus who I am as a person, I mean, I'm going to just apologize to a lot of people. Like if I had some 12 steps neuroscience program, I'd have to go and find all the people I've said mean things to, or, didn't use an appropriate filter, or, judge them too harshly. I would never finish apologizing to people. So, I've learned and I've grown, and I think that's all you can ask of yourself as a person. And I think that's what I would say to everybody out there. We've all made mistakes. We've all said things and done things that we regret or recognize or were not ideal. And you learn from it. And all you can do is keep moving forward and keep learning and getting better.
Amen. That was another beautifully said sentiment. Honestly, Raquel, I love chatting with you. I know we went out to lunch at the conference, and I think we missed part of the next session because we were just talking at lunch. It was you, me, and Jesse, and we were just talking and having such a good conversation. It was like, oh, the conversation I'm having here is I'm getting so much more than anything I'll get in that room. And that session was great too. But I love chatting with you. I love your insight. You're doing a wealth of good in the community, in the professional world. Keep going, keep asking those hard questions, because company leaders and just people in general need to hear it.
Well, I appreciate it, Dana. And, I sometimes get lost in conversations because I feel like, I don't know, there's something about the present moment that I think time becomes an inhibitor to really, getting something good out of a moment. You're like, oh, I'm sorry, we're out of time. We've got to go to the next session. And it's like you said, I feel like being here right now, in that moment when we were eating was the right place to be. And so I look at, us recording this, and it was we set aside time, and, we kind of knew we were going to go over, but time shouldn't interfere with quality or with moments that really matter. And I think that as a society, as a world, time manages us versus us managing ourselves relative to time just ticking by. And so this is why my meetings tend to go over, or, I give a presentation. I'm like, I understand we have a schedule. No, I really do. But however, this conversation was really important. And so it's really hard for me. And this is part of why I suck at email and text as well, is because there's something about being, and I think it's because I read lips and body language, and there's something about being, it doesn't have to be in person. It can be like this on camera, but there's something about moments that you're never going to be able to replicate again. All these moments we have in our lives, they're really unique. Each moment, it's never going to happen the same way with the same people in the same circumstances. And you never know what a moment can do for someone. And I feel like I've had some of my most compelling moments that have changed my life or my outlook or my mindset have been in shorter moments, right, of time, maybe. But sometimes it's unscheduled time. So it's I think we need to not be managed so much by a clock and instead really our instincts and that sort of thing. So I really appreciate that space because I feel like you're sort of in that space with me. Every time that we talk, I don't feel like you're sitting there going, okay, it's time to go. So yeah, I really appreciate that about you. And maybe you can teach that in your improv. I don't know. But I really also appreciate what you're doing. And I think that, you're doing something that's not typical in organizations, or maybe it's improv is being used in ways that we've never used it before on a large scale. And so anytime that you're innovative, anytime that you're doing something that's new and different, it's a lot of work. So I just wanted to say thank you to you for, doing something that it's not like people are out there putting out RFPs, for improv in a corporation or something like this,
They're not yet.
Not yet, right? So they're not doing that for my stuff exactly either. And that is a sign of something unique and something valuable, because when it's just like everyone's doing this, maybe it's not as valuable. And I think that, there's so much that we can take from other worlds. And that's why silos are such an issue, that we sometimes minimize the amount that we can learn from each other. And so I think that you're doing something that comes from an artistic world, a world that many people don't understand or feel that they're a part of. And you're making it accessible to people and meaningful, right? So I always say I like to make things accessible and meaningful. So you're making it accessible, that it's easy to do. Even I was able to do it, and I didn't need to ask for help or extra instructions. So that says something, right? And it's meaningful because I could see the application that it would have for me, and also the application that would have for all of the things that I do. I'm like, ooh, this could be used for the parasympathetic nervous system. Ooh, this could be used for trauma, because when you use the body and, you do all of these things. So like my brain was already going like, la, 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 la. We could do all of these things. And it's not easy when you feel like you're like, like slowly grinding your way through this, adventure where you're like all by yourself, no one has been there before. You feel like you're losing your mind sometimes when you talk with people, and you have to be so persistent and just keep on going. And a lot of times when you get a chance to go do something, and people will feel and see the impact that it has, and then that's all it takes to really make it like a thing that then there are RFPs for it, right? So
right.
Someone has to do it. Someone has to be that person. And it's not easy to be the first of things and to do these things, because you're creating a new arena, I think. And so there are little pockets, but I think you're doing something great, and I think you're doing something big. And so don't get discouraged if people don't see yet the value that it has, because they will see it, because it is science-based. That's what I will say. It's science-based.
Right, it is.
It's evidence-based, it's science-based, and it's a lot of what this world needs. And I can say that from a human performance and human behavior perspective. So thank you, Dana, for everything that you're doing.
Oh my God, Raquel, this has just been amazing. And I think I got through half the questions I had. So you got to come back on.
Part 2.
I'll get you back on. Part 2. You're a fantastic human being. I hope we meet up again at another conference, and we're both presenting, and we get to go have lunch again. You know what? I think that's actually a reality. We'll make that happen for sure.
We will make that happen. Maybe we can actually go in and together do something for an organization to get their people more creative, thriving. We bring our, expertise together, and we go and make things happen. So, it doesn't have to be at a conference. I think there are lots of opportunities. And I know that you're going to be speaking at a conference coming up, the one that that we met at. I won't be there this year, but I know that you're going to do a phenomenal job, and that you're going to really open up people's eyes and hearts to possibilities that they haven't seen before. So I wish you the best at that conference, and I wish that I could be there with you, but we will make something happen.
We will. And the wheels are turning for sure. Yes. And we will say yes. And, and totally. We'll have part 2. I loved every minute of this. I can only imagine that our listeners loved every minute of this. They got so much housework done or walked around like miles now while listening. Whatever you do with your podcast, I imagine you got a lot done in this time, because I really enjoyed it. Raquel, where can our listeners find out more about you?
Well, I have a website, revitalizeproject.com. I put it together myself, so it may not reflect these programs. Yeah, these are the things I do myself now. But you can also find Revitalize Project on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. But I only really use Instagram, and then I just copy everything to Facebook and Twitter. And then you can also find me on LinkedIn. So if you're a professional and you are in HR, you're in, organization, you have some influence on making a change in your organization so that it's better for people and they want to work there, love working there, and they're healthy because they work there, then you can also contact me on LinkedIn, and it's under Dr. Raquel Garzon. So, and then you can find my book, The Business of You, on Amazon. So self-published, because I probably wouldn't play well in the sandbox with publishers either. So that's my style. It's that, published it myself, so I don't have to, deal with other people's boxes and fitting into it. So,
and at least you know that, and
I do
know that. But any conferences to plug next year? Anything you're going to that you know of already?
The only thing that I had that was like public that people could attend, it was yesterday. It was yesterday.
Oh,
it was
sweet.
It was on behavior change, but you can find, I designed, along with stressstop.com. Actually, StressStop will be at the conference there that you're presenting in Colorado.
Oh, yeah.
I collaborated with StressStop. They have a lot of digital things that I don't have. And so I have content, they have digital capabilities. So we partnered on a behavior change program, and it's 30 days. It's 2 minutes a day. For 30 days. I did it in English and Spanish, not translated, but me just talking. So I don't know if I said the same things in English and Spanish because I did them all just natural and organically. And so you can find my behavioral change solution there, and then a couple of other interviews that are also at stressstop.com. So that's another place. But yeah, I don't have anything else that's like public. Everything else is very, inside organizations hiring me to come in and help the organization be a great place for people to work. And that's the idea. So.
Oh, I loved every minute of this. Thank you so much for sharing your time, your stories, yourself with us today. I am better for hearing your story. I know our listeners are. I'm just thank you. I can't thank you enough. I'm in awe of this conversation.
Oh, thank you, Dana. I feel the same way about you. And anytime that you want to get together and talk and record it, I'm happy to do so.
Yes, and. And to our listeners, thank you so much for listening today. I'm so grateful that you hung on and listened to the whole thing. To be honest, time just flew by. And really, I loved what Raquel said about just being present in the moment. Sure, time flies by sometimes, but that just means you were really present and focused and in the moment, which is beautiful. I also realize that there are deadlines and time restraints, and when you're speaking, you need to stay within time, but podcasting's a little different, and I loved just talking and didn't really see what time it was until the end. I was like, wow, we really kept going, and I didn't even call for ads either, so we talked about a lot of different stuff today, so I'm curious to hear what resonated with you. You can certainly reach out to me at Dana, Dayna, at improvlyspeaking.com. Let me know what resonated, what epiphanies you got from today, any kind of moments that were special to you. I'd love to hear and also support and cheer you on in whatever it is you're doing. For me, what really resonated was when she talked about how she brings her true self to her speeches. She's certainly worked on making improvements and always has that growth mindset to make improvements and get better. It's not that she's being content or staying stagnant, but she realizes that she brings herself, the good, the bad, and the in-between. I won't say the ugly, but the good, the bad, the in-between. Maybe she moves around a lot. She paces a lot. She does what she needs to do to speak in front of an audience. And I appreciate that. I've definitely worked on this, and I can say now that I'm bringing like 90% of myself to speeches, but there's still always the part of me that's like, am I making enough eye contact? Am I moving around enough? Am I using my hands too much? What am I doing that's distracting? And I'm pretty much focused on the content and the audience, but there's still a little piece of me that's still thinking about other things. So I would love to get to 100% just being there and being present in the moment. That was huge for me. So please feel free to share what was huge for you. And you can also reach me on social media. On Instagram, I'm at Improv-ly Speaking. On LinkedIn, I'm at Dana Gallen. And I also have my improvlyspeaking.com website with a list of my services and offerings and other resources about improv. As always, thank you so much for listening and supporting Improv-ly Speaking. I'm so grateful for you. Would love to hear from you and what you're getting out of this. I'm getting so much out of it. I love podcasting. I know I've mentioned this before, but I love, 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 love it, especially with conversations like these that are just so fun and make the time go by so quickly. So thanks again for being here, and I'll talk to you next time.